Good morning, my dear students. Today we are discussing about genetic testing. So, what is the genetic testing and which type of genetic tests are available for the determination of the mutation and any other genetical disorders presented in the body? That's one is determined by the with the using of the genetic testing. So, genetic testing is also called as a DNA based test. So, genetic test or DNA based test. So, what is the DNA based test or genetic test? It is among the newest and most sophisticated of techniques used to for used to test for the diagnosis or test for the genetic disorders. So here it one is the determination of the DNA based test and the determination of the this tests are the used for the diagnosis of the genetical disorders. It is the mainly determination of the genetical disorders involve the examination of the DNA. So examination of the DNA. So any other genetical disorders, any changes occurs in the DNA, which type of diseases is presented in genetically is determined by the this genetic test or DNA based test. So genetic tests on blood and other tissues finding the genetic disorders. How to determine the genetic test? So how which type of samples are collected means blood samples, and the next one tissues, other tissues find the genetic disorders. So like a cancer, collect the tissue from the site of cancer and identify the genetical changes, and blood samples also collect from the body and identify the genetical tests. And about 900 such tests are available of the genetic test, and doctors use the genetic test in the several reasons. So which type of reasons are involved in the identification of the genetic test? So simply how to determination of the genetic test and which type of genetic tests are available. And before this one test we will discuss about the which purpose we are studying about the genetic tests. Like number one is the finding the possible genetical diseases in unborn babies, at the pregnant stage. So any other genetic tests, any genetical disorders are present in the baby or not, it's one is determined. And finding out people carry the gene for the disease and might passes into the children. So here I identify the carry of the genes. So abnormal genes, any abnormal genes are presented in the baby, that's one is identified. And screening the embryos for the disease. So embryos identification purpose and testing for genetic diseases in adults before they cause the symptoms. So here, so they before they cause the symptoms, so complete disease is converted before identify these type of disorders, identify these type of disorders are identified. And the next one, confirming the diagnosis in a person who has disease symptoms. So who has disease symptoms, that one is a confirmed by the genetical disorders. So the genetic tests are used variety of laboratory techniques determine if person has the genetic condition or disease or likely get disease. Genetic testing is can cover reveal changes in the alteration of the gene that may causes illness or diseases. These type of all type of diseases are identified. And the next one, although genetic test can prove important information and diagnosing, testing, and preventing illness and the limitations, these are all are identified. What are there? It's provide the information for the diagnosis, testing, and preventing illness and limitations are identified. For example, if you have a healthy person, a positive results from the genetic testing does not always mean you will develop a disease. And other hand, some situations a negative results sometimes occurs the positive results and negative results, so not the guarantee you will not have the certain disorders. So these type of this is the importance of the genetic testing. And the next one, types of genetic testing, which type of genetic testing are there. So like first one is the carrier identification, include the genetic testing used by couples who families have the history of the receive genetic disorders, means in couple and means mother or father. So mother side and father side, which one have the genetical disorders, that one is the history of the patient. And three common tests are including. So number one is cystic fibrosis. Number one is the cystic fibrosis. Number two is the Tay-Sachs disease, and number three is the sickle cell trait. So these type of tests are included for the determination of the history of the patient. And prenatal diagnostic genetic testing on fetus prenatal diagnostic tests and may occur in the three risk of the bearing child with the gene associated with the mental retardation, physical retardation, Down syndrome, and any other changes in the baby is identified with the using of the one test that is called as a prenatal diagnostic test. And the newborn screening frequency tests also, these tests also preventive health measures. And the next one, test the usual clear benefits of the newborn baby and treatment available. And phenylketonuria and congenital hypothyroidism, these are all are determined with the using of the types of genetic tests. And what are the types of genetic tests? So means several types of genetic tests are available. So first one is a diagnostic testing. So diagnostic testing is a first one. So diagnostic testing is used to diagnosis or rule out the specific gene or chromosomal condition. So this one is first of all determination of the rule out of the specific gene or chromosomal condition. What about the chromosome? What about the genes? These are all are determined. These are all are determined with the these are all are determined with this diagnostics testing. And the next one, here, uh, genetic testing is used to confirm the diagnosis when particular condition in the suspected based on physical mutation and symptoms also. It one is a determination of the physical mutation and symptoms. These are all are determined. Physical mutation and symptoms are all are determined with the using of the diagnostic testing. And diagnostic testing can be performed many any time of during the person's life, but not available for all gene all conditions. So some genes sometimes only we are determine and identify the genetic diseases. And with the using of these tests. And the next one, pre-implantation genetic test diagnosis. So pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, what about the pre-implantation genetic diagnosis? So here genetic test procedure that are performed on human embryosis of the period human embryosis. So in the human embryosis, implantation part of the and in vitro fertilization procedures are identified with the using of pre-implantation genetic disorders. Means before the forming of the baby, so the eggs and sperms are converted into baby. We know that. So before, what happened in the body, in case of there is no chance for the formation of the pregnant, and at that moment we are determining this particular type of tests. And the next one, predictive and pre-symptomatic testing. Predictive and pre-symptomatic testing is used to detect the mutations. Determination of the mutations associated with the disorders appears birth and after life, what happened, any changes occurs in the gene. So that's one is the determined is the predictive and pre-symptomatic testing. So this test is helpful for the family members with the genetic disorder. In the family members, any other person suffered with the genetic disorders, so that's one is determined with the using of the predictive and pre-symptomatic testing. So this is about the predictive and pre-symptomatic testing. And the next one more test is uh, forensic testing. Simply forensic testing is especially this one test is a determination of the especially identify the crime cases. So here forensic testing is a DNA sequence identified individual for the legal purpose only. This one is identified by the legal purpose. Unlike this tests are above, forensic testing is not used to detect the gene mutation associated with the diseases. This one is not a determination of the gene mutation and diseases not identified, but is it identify the gene therapy and gene sequence is identified, especially crime suspect purpose and biological relationship between two persons are determined with the using of the forensic testing. And the next one, prenatal testing. Prenatal testing is the type of the genetic test is the uses a special DNA markers to the identify the same or similar inherent patterns between related the individuals. So identified between the two persons will say similar inherent patterns or any other patterns are presented. That one is a prenatal testing. So prenatal testing is also it is a determination of the similar activities identified in the two patients or two persons. So based on the fact of the inherited half of of our DNA from the father, from the mother. So, for example, our body is made up of two DNAs. So one part is mother, one part is father. So at that moment is a DNA scientist test individual to find the match of DNA sequence, some highly different markers to draw the conclusion of the relatedness. Also, these all are determined by the perinatal testing. And the next one, research testing. Research testing is included the finding unknown genes, is especially determination of the unknown genes and learning how gene work and advancing our understanding genetic conditions. And the next one, the result of testing is a part of the research and study the unusual not available to patients or their healthcare providers. Also means any other healthcare providers, means any other diseases is presented, that's one is identified with the using of the research testing. And the next one, last one is pharmacogenomics. Pharmacogenomics means this type of genetic testing that determine the influence the genetic vaccination on drug response, genetic vaccination on drug response. And this test is determined especially genetic variations on the drug response. So genetic variations means any other changes in the genetically, that's one is determined with the using of the pharmacogenomics. So this is about the genetic testing and diagnosis of the different components. So this is about our topic. If you have any doubts from this topic, genetic testing, tomorrow we will discuss. Thank you.